So we watched Cuties last night. The Netflix, I guess it wasn't created by Netflix. The hour and a half long narrative film describing a group of 11-year-old girls in Paris, I guess it is, who are dancing. I'm going to put that in quotes. And we follow Amy in particular, who is the daughter of, are they Senegalese?
Mm-hmm.
Senegalese immigrants, and she is not feeling at home in her home for a lot of good reasons, in part because her mother is disempowered in life as an observant Muslim, and her father has gone back to Senegal to pick up a second wife. And this feels to Amy, we are led to believe, quite horrifying and disempowering, as it would be. And in that part of this film, I got it. Made a lot of sense. Of course, that would be awful. And there's a scene early on in which she ends up under a bed because she was doing something she didn't want her mom and auntie to see. And so when they come in, she just hides. She doesn't mean to be eavesdropping, but she's eavesdropping on the conversation in which I think it's the auntie is telling the mom, you need to call all the family members and tell them how pleased you are about your husband's new wife and how you hope that they'll be very fertile. And after the auntie leaves, the mom breaks down and is crying, and it's clearly an awful situation. And situations in which polygyny is forced on women are exactly not empowering, and that's awful. However, the idea that this hypersexualized preteen dance, again in quotes, behavior by girls is an antidote. We are led to believe now maybe part of the point they were trying to make in the film, but no. There is so much graphic sexualization of these little girls in this film that could have been done differently without actually bringing all of our attention to their budding sexual bodies. And the fact is that the opposite of female disempowerment is not female hypersexualization. It's not. Both of these things, both of these ways of being are deeply disempowering of women.
So I'm not sure that wasn't the point of the screenplay. Mm-hmm. I found
pointing out that this preteen twerking is... So spell out what you mean. You're not sure that what wasn't the point.
Years ago, I was at one of these IDW events in Sydney, Australia, and I made a point that Eric then quickly jumped in and he said nobody was going to get it, but that it was a next level point. And the point I tried to make was that the obvious problem with the way Muslim culture, at least in Orthodox sections, deals with women is something that the West is not in a good position to comment on, because as much as, a burqa is a troubling thing to inflict on women, the West has created an entirely different problem, and it is this hypersexualization of girls. And so I thought, actually, I detested this film. Okay,
yes, so
it was both tedious and disgusting at the same time, right? To the extent that it, like the moment-to-moment plot was like it was like Lord of the Butterflies, like a girl version of Lord of the Flies.
Actually, and that's important. I don't want to interrupt for long, but we also saw this group of 4 girls, sometimes 5, but sort of oscillating group of 4 girls, behaving like a gang of errant boys.
Yeah.
Except that they were using their budding sexuality to get what they needed. But they were being aggressive, and they were play acting as boys and as women, and in fact they're neither. They're girls.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, the film wasn't any good, but the very final scene suggested to me that it was not making the point that I thought it was making, which was that this hypersexualization is the antidote to the other thing.
Mhm.
The very final scene seems to suggest that it was making a point more like the one that I was trying to make in Australia, which is that both of these answers are absurd and that that's a problem, right? That basically these are girls and they should be allowed to be girls rather than be turned into women early.
And yet the very final scene is like 15 seconds
It's
long.
15 seconds long.
In
I was
like
surprised.
a more than hour and a half long
I was surprised to see it because I was already writing my scathing review in my head. And then it was like, oh, actually, maybe they do have the right point. Now, the film is still despicable, right? It's still despicable because it was actually filmed with underage girls, which meant that it couldn't avoid doing the very thing that maybe it was critiquing, right?
Yeah.
And somebody made some decisions in the making of this film to sexualize these girls in a way that would probably increase audience because it will appeal to a certain fraction of presumably straight men, which is despicable. So the point that Tulsi Gabbard made on Twitter yesterday that had her trending about the fact that this is likely to increase things like trafficking is surely right. And then there's the ultimate evil here, which is what Netflix has done with it. Right. So the point is Netflix clearly in the way that they are attempting to attract people is not in possession of what this actually was, which is a very questionable art film. Right. What Netflix decided to do was turn it into a sensation, either because of the sexualizing of young girls or because of the controversy that would arise out of doing that. Either way, my God, right? We're actually going to tolerate Netflix doing this. But the whole thing is sort of tangled because I don't know what was on the mind of the screenwriters. If it had been a book in which there were no actresses and it made the same point that I think it was making in that very final scene, then I would say, yeah, that's an important point, right? By doing it in this way that for the entirety of the film seems to be suggesting that, this is liberation, totally pollutes that message. And then for it to be co-opted by an economic Goliath with its own bottom line in mind is truly troubling.
Yeah, it is. And it's not, I don't think there's any excuse for any of the explicit visual sexualization of the children in the film. But it's not even just one scene. It's throughout. It starts early and it goes to the penultimate scene, basically. And it's excruciating. And it's at some level more of the same that Hollywood and Madison Avenue, et cetera, have been giving us for decades and decades and decades, except the age range about which it's acceptable is advancing earlier and earlier. And like, what kind of a country imagines that sexualizing children is okay? I can't even imagine what's in your head if you think that that's okay. Like you have, again, really lost the plot on what childhood is and should be and can be and must be.
I totally agree with this. And as I was watching this film, I did have the following odd thought, which was, suppose there had been no controversy, right? Suppose that somehow we had encountered this thing and thought, okay, French art film, Senegalese immigrants, and watched it without any
Context,
expectations of what it was. I am sure that I would have found it despicable, but I am not sure that I would have found it noteworthy. In other words, this is part and parcel of what we do to girls. And the thing that was extreme here was how young the girls were, but the fact that we are constantly being bombarded with messages that hypersexualize girls, that play games with actresses who may be, adults but are playing younger, right? This whole thing is just how the West functions. And it's, to me, I think it's almost entirely the result of Madison Avenue using female sexuality, this very potent force, to sell shit, right? And that the fact that it has affected the way women view themselves is almost a byproduct of the desire to raise people's insecurities in order to get them to buy things. But I don't think I would have thought maybe I would have thought to tweet, my God, did I see a terrible film? Let me tell you what's in it. But I'm not sure that it would have, would have stood out.
I bet there's a good chance we wouldn't have finished watching it.
Oh, yeah,
absent the
I agree
context,
with
right?
that.
It just would have started. And I'm like, what are they doing? Wow, no, never mind.
Right.
Just not watching this. I guess I want to just reiterate what I think I said earlier, but maybe didn't say clearly, which is that this is being sold to us as a response to the disempowerment and desexualization of the women in this Senegalese immigrant Muslim community. And there is then this conflation of sex with power. And this is very much in the, critical theories genre of thinking, sort of postmodernism and post-structuralism and such. Sex obviously is used as power, as we were just talking about, by Madison Avenue, by young women, by, in a lot of places. But the idea that observing that a family structure, community structure routinely and frankly systemically disempowers women, and that disempowering of women is about controlling of sex, does not mean that the response to that ought to be all sex all the time as early as possible, absent any community interaction or commitment or anything, because that is also not going to empower anyone. You are not going to simply have power if you flaunt sexuality at every turn, just because you have observed correctly that women in your community are desexualized and also have no power.
Yeah, two things. One of these points I think is going to be very hard to make, but the control that society almost inevitably exerts over female sexuality is not about controlling females per se. It's about society, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is the point I tried to make in Australia, is that in fact there is a problem when human beings are living in high density, which has to do with the effect that sexuality, the disruptive effect that it has if there's not some mechanism that keeps some kind of order. And the point I made in Australia was there are many different mechanisms. Some of them are laughable. Some of them are ghastly. All of them, the unfairness of all of them falls too heavily on women, right? Mm-hmm. But it is society figuring out mechanisms to address an actual structural problem that that results in this. And so, at some level, the upshot is we don't have a good solution here. We've got lots of bad solutions, but this is the inevitable result, of society in which, it is perfectly natural for Cardi B to be talking to Joe Biden in the midst of a presidential election, as if we, why are we shocked that
as if that
girls
is
are getting this
him
message?
Indicating that he thinks women should be empowered, as opposed to actually, if there's any message there, it's applauding hypersexualization and the cheapening of sex of women by women.
And this is another difficult point to make, but the point is actually, you know what? Female sexual power is power. But mm-hmm. females are in competition with themselves in a sense, because which power do you want to drive the world? Do you want female achievement to be the kind of female right. power that women should aspire to? Or do you want their ability to tangle society in knots, which of course fades? So
no, and I think this is in fact the key tension between sort of second wave feminism and later waves feminism. That second wave feminism was aspiring to free women from many of the domestic shackles that, some of which are simply biologically enforced by anatomy and physiology, by the fact that women are who gestate and lactate, but freeing women from the inherent expectation that you will be married and have children early, and you will be the ones you will be the one staying home and taking care of them. It's sort of a solo parenting role, which itself is a novel thing, right? In monogamy, there tends to be biparental care, not the sort of 1950s housewife version of family life, which is it's a very weird little blip that I don't know why anyone aspires to that. But so second wave feminism was about freeing women from constraints that we could be freed from, and presumably allowing us to make decisions based on what it was that we wanted to do in the world, achievement, and observing that men and women are different, and that women will sometimes make the same choices as men and sometimes different ones, and those choices may actually help society become a better place as well. And let's actually embrace the kinds of contributions that women can make in the world. That all feels to me like the kind of second wave feminism that my mother and her business partner and the women who I had as role models when I was growing up engaged with. And then we have this third wave feminism come around, which is about using the power that you have as your sexuality to trick men into doing stuff, and to pretend that that means that you're in power, and you're not. It's not powerful. It will end. Actual achievement will grow over time, just like male actual achievement grows over time. Why would you pick the model of power that is brief, that is fleeting, and that is actually disempowering? Well, because you suddenly come into it when you're 15, 16, 17, 11, apparently, if you're in Cuties. And it's surprising, it's shocking, and every young woman has to figure out how to deal with it. But imagining that that's the pinnacle of your life, it's like being the dude on the football team at 17 that's his best moment in life. That is the equivalent of aspiring to be only a sexual being, and that is what your value is as a woman. And it's, it has always struck me as anti-feminist, faux feminist. And of course, it goes by third wave feminism and doesn't seem like anything empowering of women.
Yeah, it's an inversion of feminism.
Yeah.
The thing that I would add is that it is also largely arbitrary, like melanin content of your skin, right? Why do we want people judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin? Because it makes for a better world, right? If we do that. And so the point is,
it's an immutable characteristic is what you're saying.
I don't want to say it's totally immutable. It may be that, a beautiful woman is in part beautiful because, or a beautiful young woman is beautiful because, she puts effort into being fit or whatever. But it is largely immutable. Mm-hmm. And so the question is really, we could take a traditional view and, women are sort of playing the supportive role at home. Many of us don't want that, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want that. But we also don't want anything that empowers women is good. Because if what's empowering you is that you're waving your tits in somebody's face, it's not productive, right?
I don't want that any more than anything that empowers men is good. Anything that empowers pick your demographic is good is a terrible rubric and will be gamed. And we see that in Black Lives Matter. We see that in Me Too. We see that in Cuties. We see it across the board. Of course we do.
Right. And so what you want is a system in which the women who are empowered to speak, for example, to presidential candidates and things like that, are women who have accomplished something that has brought, that's made the world more interesting, has extended our capacity in some way, right? Has contributed, right? Mm-hmm. The mythology of markets is that you get paid for contributing to our welfare by creating things that enhance us. Yep. And the problem is if we put too much emphasis on youthful sexuality in females, which, there's a biological bias in favor of exactly that, then what the point is, the females who end up empowered are inherently going to be young, and that means the chances that they will actually know something worth conveying are that much lower, right?
Youth and wisdom are inversely correlated almost always.
Right. And you can be wise beyond your years, but you can't be wise as a very young person.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it's really, these two kinds of feminism are in competition with each other. And when you spot the direction one of them pulls, it is absolutely anti-feminist.